In April of 1928, a member of the Hunter family was found dead inside an upstairs bedroom of Hunter Mansion, a house that had been built to celebrate success, not to witness an ending like this. The discovery did not come with screams or crowds. It came late, behind a closed door, in a room meant for rest, where morning light fell across white classical revival walls that suddenly felt hollow. Downstairs, the grand staircase stood perfectly still, polished for guests who would never arrive again. This mansion, completed in 1904 with Coca-Cola bottling money, was designed as proof that wealth could buy stability, respect, and safety for a family rising fast in the South. But on that morning, none of those promises held. No music echoed through the halls. No servants called out. The house absorbed the shock in silence, as if it had been waiting for this moment. What was lost here was not only a life, but the belief that this house could protect the people inside it. To understand how a mansion built on soda fortune ended with a quiet death behind a locked door, we have to return to the moment when this house was first imagined, and to the confidence that money alone could hold everything together. This is the story of George Thomas Hunter and Hunter Mansion, a house built to turn sudden wealth into something that looked permanent. Hunter did not invent Coca-Cola, and he did not own the brand, but he mastered the part that mattered most in the American South at the turn of the century: bottling, distribution, and speed. Soda moved faster than tradition, and money followed. In a single generation, the Hunter family crossed a line that had taken others decades to approach. From regional businessmen to members of Southern high society, from practical homes to a mansion meant to speak for them before they ever entered a room. This is a story about new money trying to learn the language of old stability. It is about a dream that promised comfort, respect, and safety, then quietly demanded a psychological price. It is about a family that believed a house could anchor them against uncertainty, and about a building that slowly became a container for pressure instead of protection. By the time Hunter Mansion rose above the river, success had already arrived, but nothing had prepared the people inside for what success would do to them. This house was not built to survive poverty or failure. It was built to preserve triumph. And that is where the risk began. When this story ends, you will understand why wealth does not collapse families all at once, why houses outlive the intentions behind them, and why some mansions become monuments not to achievement, but to the quiet cost of getting everything you once wanted. To see how that cost accumulated, we have to return to the beginning, before the parties, before the silence, before soda money hardened into walls and expectations. George Thomas Hunter did not begin life inside marble halls or under chandeliers. He was born into a Southern economy that rewarded patience, loyalty, and knowing your place, and punished those who moved too fast or reached too high. Chattanooga at the end of the 19th century was not yet a city of grand estates. It was a working town shaped by rail lines, river traffic, and factories that ran on long hours and modest margins. Families like the Hunters lived close to the rhythms of labor and local trade, not inherited prestige. Status was slow to earn and even slower to accept newcomers. In that world, security came from stability, not ambition. A respectable life meant steady income, predictable routines, and a future that looked very much like the past. Hunter grew up watching how tightly class lines were drawn, how quickly society noticed success, and how unforgiving it could be toward those who tried to cross boundaries without permission. This was not a childhood surrounded by excess, but by observation. He learned early that money alone did not grant belonging, and that recognition had to be built, not claimed. Long before the mansion existed, before Coca-Cola money entered the picture, Hunter carried with him a quiet awareness that survival in the South depended on adapting faster than the system expected you to. That understanding would later shape every decision he made, including the kind of house he believed he needed to build to finally be seen. By the time George Thomas Hunter reached adulthood, the South was changing faster than its social rules could keep up. Railroads compressed distance, advertising reshaped desire, and soda, once sold as medicine, became a daily habit. What separated Hunter from others was not invention, but timing. He understood that the future of Coca-Cola did not rest only in formulas or brand names, but in bottling plants, logistics, and speed. While others debated respectability, Hunter focused on distribution. While old wealth moved cautiously, new money moved in crates and rail cars. Bottling turned syrup into reach, and reach into power. In cities like Chattanooga, this shift created opportunity and tension at the same time. The money arrived quickly, but acceptance lagged behind. Hunter was suddenly wealthy in a system that had not decided whether to trust him yet. His work placed him close to the engine of a growing empire tied to Coca-Cola, yet far from the inherited networks that defined Southern legitimacy. That gap shaped his ambition. Success became something that had to be made visible, undeniable, structural. A business could disappear, cash could move, but buildings stayed. As Hunter's role in bottling expanded and profits stabilized, the idea of permanence began to matter more than comfort. He was no longer trying to survive. He was trying to secure a position that could not be questioned. This was the moment when the future mansion first took shape in his thinking, not as a home, but as proof. Proof that soda money was not temporary. Proof that speed could coexist with respect. Proof that a family without generational power could build something that looked like it belonged. Long before the first stone was set, the pressure was already there. The house would not simply shelter a family. It would carry the weight of an entire rise and the fear of how easily that rise could be dismissed. There was a moment, quiet and easily missed, when ambition shifted into decision. It did not arrive as a public victory or a signed contract. It arrived as a realization that staying small was no longer an option. Hunter had learned the limits of movement inside Southern society, how quickly momentum could stall without visible proof of arrival. Work alone was not enough. Profit alone was not enough. What he needed was something fixed, something that would not argue back, something that would speak on his behalf every time he was not in the room. Leaving the modest patterns of his upbringing was not just a financial step, it was a psychological one. It meant choosing permanence over flexibility, display over discretion. The idea of a grand house offered a solution that business never could. A house could anchor reputation, it could host alliances, it could absorb attention and redirect judgment. In that sense, the future mansion became a strategy long before it became a structure. It promised to resolve tension between speed and respectability, between new money and old expectations. This decision did not come from vanity alone. It came from pressure, from the fear that without something solid, everything earned so quickly could dissolve just as fast. Hunter was not trying to escape his past. He was trying to outgrow it. And in doing so, he began moving toward a kind of commitment that cannot be revised once built. The choice to pursue permanence set the direction for everything that followed. It narrowed options. It raised stakes. It tied identity to walls that would one day outlast intention. This was the final step before the mansion entered the world. Not construction, not design, but belief. Belief that a house could complete a rise that business had already begun. Belief that stability could be manufactured. And belief that once built, it would hold. By the early years of the 20th century, George Thomas Hunter was no longer experimenting. His bottling operations had stabilized. Profits arrived with regularity, and the pace of expansion slowed just enough to feel dependable. This was the stage where many men would pause. Hunter did the opposite. He began converting business momentum into physical form. The decision to build was not sudden. It followed a pattern. Success created visibility. Visibility attracted scrutiny. Scrutiny demanded reassurance. In the social world Hunter was entering, reassurance did not come from balance sheets. It came from land, symmetry, and stone. A large house would signal that his rise was not temporary, not speculative, not at risk of reversal. Planning the mansion became an extension of the business itself. Location mattered. Elevation mattered. The house needed to overlook rather than blend in. Its presence had to be legible from a distance, readable as permanence. Hunter chose a style that borrowed authority rather than invention. Classical revival spoke a familiar language. Columns suggested order. Proportion suggested restraint. It was a visual argument that his wealth followed rules, even if it had arrived quickly. Inside, the layout favored procession and scale. Rooms were designed to lead guests forward, to slow them down, to remind them where they were and why. This was not about comfort first. It was about impression first, comfort second. Every choice carried intention. The mansion would host alliances. It would frame conversations. It would absorb the attention that business alone could not. By committing resources to walls instead of expansion, Hunter was locking value in place. He was trading flexibility for legitimacy. At this stage, the house was still an idea, still lines on paper, still solvable. But the logic was already fixed. Once built, it would not adapt the way a company could. It would stand where it was placed, carrying meaning long after the circumstances that created it had changed. That risk was accepted. Stability, in Hunter's mind, was worth the cost of immobility. The house was becoming the final proof that his success had earned the right to stay. Construction transformed intention into routine. Once work began, the idea of permanence stopped being abstract and started to demand daily discipline. Materials arrived on schedule. Labor followed a plan. The site changed slowly and visibly, turning ambition into something neighbors could measure with their eyes. In Chattanooga, a house rising like this was a message. It said the owner expected to remain. It said he had nothing to hide and nothing to retreat from. As walls climbed, choices narrowed. Each decision fixed another outcome in place. Scale replaced flexibility. The footprint asserted confidence before a single room was finished. Inside, the design favored order over intimacy. Long sightlines created distance. Formal rooms anticipated guests more than family. Circulation mattered because movement was part of the performance. Guests would enter, pause, advance, look up. The house taught them how to behave. Even before furniture arrived, the building set terms. This was not excess for its own sake. It was calibration. The architecture translated business credibility into social credibility. Every proportion was meant to reassure observers that the fortune behind it was stable and disciplined. Outside, the grounds framed approach and departure, giving the structure time to announce itself. Inside, rooms held their shape regardless of who occupied them. This mattered to a man whose success had come from motion. Bottling rewarded speed. Buildings rewarded stillness. By choosing stillness, Hunter accepted a different set of rules. Once completed, the house would resist change. It would require upkeep. It would collect memory. It would outlast moods and market cycles. That was the bargain. As the shell closed in, the future of the family began to attach itself to the future of the structure. Private life would now take place inside a public statement. The walls would hear conversations meant to remain light and others meant to remain private. The house would not distinguish between them. By the time the roof went on, the logic was complete. What began as reassurance had become obligation. The mansion would demand to be lived up to, and from that point on, the family would not simply inhabit it. They would answer to it. When the house was finally completed, it entered the city as a finished sentence. There was nothing provisional left about it. The symmetry was exact. The scale was deliberate. The message was clear to anyone who approached the grounds. This was not a residence built to adapt. It was built to define. For George Thomas Hunter, the mansion resolved a long internal argument. It placed his success in stone and removed it from debate. The house now spoke before he did. It established rank without explanation. But that clarity came with a trade. The more complete the structure became, the less room there was for ambiguity inside it. Daily life had to conform to the shape that had been chosen. Family routines adjusted to formal spaces. Privacy bent around visibility. Silence carried farther in rooms designed for voices. The house did not change with its occupants. The occupants changed to fit the house. This was the final transformation of wealth into architecture. Money had become obligation. Presence had become performance. Stability had become something that required constant maintenance. From the outside, the mansion projected control and order. From the inside, it demanded consistency. There was no casual way to live inside a place built as an argument. Every entrance felt ceremonial. Every gathering felt observed. Even quiet moments carried weight because the setting refused to shrink around them. Hunter had succeeded in making his rise permanent, but permanence also meant exposure. The house held nothing lightly. It amplified behavior and preserved it. Small tensions lingered longer. Unspoken worries found space to echo. This was not yet tragedy. It was alignment, a family, and a building settling into a relationship that would define them both. The mansion had done what it was meant to do. It secured a position in society. It ended questions about legitimacy, and in doing so, it quietly set the conditions for everything that would follow. From this point on, success no longer moved. It stood still, and anything that stood still long enough would eventually have to absorb the full weight of the lives lived inside it. At the height of its social life, Hunter Mansion felt busiest at night. Carriages arrived in sequence. Voices gathered before faces did. Light spilled outward from tall windows, turning the house into a signal that something was happening inside. Dinners unfolded slowly, timed to conversation rather than hunger. Music drifted through rooms designed to carry sound farther than intention. Guests moved along predictable paths, guided by architecture that suggested where to pause and where to advance. For the Hunter family, these evenings were proof that the house worked. It brought people together. It elevated standing. It made introductions easier and departures more deliberate. The mansion functioned as a social machine, converting hospitality into legitimacy. Inside, each space had a role. Formal rooms hosted performance. Secondary rooms absorbed overflow. Corridors handled transition. The house organized relationships the way a business organized supply. This was the golden age, not because it was carefree, but because it appeared complete. The family moved through familiar rituals that reinforced belonging. Children learned early which rooms were theirs and which belonged to adults. Staff maintained rhythms that kept the surface smooth. From the outside, the picture was coherence. From the inside, it was structure. The house rewarded adherence to its logic. When events followed plan, everything aligned. Conversation flowed. Evenings extended. The mansion seemed to confirm that prosperity had settled into place. Yet even in these moments, the house did more than host. It observed. It recorded patterns. It kept the memory of every gathering in the same rooms that would later feel too large. At its peak, the mansion felt alive, not because it changed, but because people adjusted themselves to it. That adjustment was subtle and rarely questioned. It felt like success. It felt like arrival. And because it felt stable, no one rushed to imagine what would happen if the rhythm ever broke. Inside Hunter Mansion, daily life followed the same careful choreography that guided its evenings. Mornings were quieter, but no less structured. Doors opened in sequence. Curtains were drawn to the same height. Meals appeared at expected times. Served in rooms that reinforced hierarchy through distance and placement. Children learned boundaries early, not through rules, but through space. Certain rooms invited play. Others demanded restraint. The house taught this without speaking. For adults, the mansion offered reassurance and pressure at the same time. It validated position while reminding everyone how visible they were. Private conversations happened in corners that still felt exposed. Even rest carried a sense of formality. Bedrooms were generous but never casual. Silence was clean, polished, and difficult to interrupt. This was a home designed to host society, and family life adjusted accordingly. The mansion rewarded routine. When days followed pattern, the structure felt supportive. Staff moved efficiently, maintaining the illusion that everything ran smoothly because it was meant to. From the outside, the family appeared settled, organized, complete. Inside, life became quieter and more contained. The house reduced improvisation. It favored predictability. Over time, this created comfort and distance in equal measure. Comfort came from knowing what to expect. Distance came from knowing how little could change without notice. The mansion did not respond emotionally. It responded architecturally. It gave the same space to joy and to tension. Laughter and disagreement echoed with the same clarity. In this phase, nothing was wrong. Nothing was broken. The house did exactly what it was built to do. It organized people, schedules, and behavior into a stable picture. But stability can also be narrowing. As routines hardened, the space left less room for deviation. What looked like harmony from afar was, in practice, a careful balance maintained through repetition. The house held that balance quietly, without comment, storing every day the same way it stored every night. Over time, the house itself became the most consistent presence in the family's life. Seasons passed and faces changed, but rooms remained exact. Celebrations repeated in the same spaces, following the same paths, producing the same photographs that looked reassuringly similar year after year. This repetition created confidence. It also created expectation. The mansion began to define what normal looked like. A successful evening meant the rooms were full. A good year meant the calendars stayed busy. Silence felt like absence rather than rest. The house rewarded visibility and quietly discouraged retreat. Its scale amplified whatever happened inside it. Small joys felt ceremonial. Minor tensions felt formal. There was no casual way to disagree in rooms designed for agreement. For the family, this was still the golden age. Nothing had broken yet. The business continued to support the lifestyle. The city recognized the address. Invitations arrived without effort. But beneath the surface, the alignment between people and place required constant adjustment. Living inside a symbol demanded performance even on ordinary days. Privacy became a negotiated space. Emotions learned to wait until the house was quiet. The mansion did not force these choices. It normalized them. Over time, normalization became habit. Habit became identity. The family did not notice the shift because it felt gradual and rewarded. Stability was doing its job. From the outside, the picture was flawless. From the inside, life was organized to fit a structure that did not bend. The house held everything together by holding everything in place. That worked as long as everyone could move at the same pace. The golden age was not defined by excess or joy alone. It was defined by balance, a balance between public presence and private restraint, a balance that felt sustainable because it had not yet been tested. The mansion stood ready to host the next gathering, the next season, the next year. And because it had always done so, no one asked what would happen if the rhythm changed. The house had become the reference point. As long as it stayed full, life felt secure. The first signs of strain did not announce themselves as crisis. They appeared as adjustments. Schedules shifted, guest lists shortened. The house that once filled easily began to feel selective about when it opened itself. Business pressures accumulated quietly, not as collapse, but as friction. Markets changed, costs rose, expectations stayed fixed. Inside the mansion, the rhythm softened. Fewer evenings required full lighting. More rooms stayed dark by default. These were practical choices that carried emotional weight. What had once felt abundant now required planning. What had once been automatic now needed discussion. The family adapted without naming the change. Adaptation felt responsible. It felt mature. It felt temporary. The house absorbed these decisions without comment. It did not shrink. It did not soften. Its scale remained the same, even as use narrowed. This created a subtle imbalance. Large spaces emphasized absence. Quiet traveled farther. Small concerns echoed longer. The mansion began to hold more air than activity. In this phase, nothing dramatic happened. No single event marked a turning point. Instead, a series of reasonable choices accumulated. Hosting less felt prudent. Spending more carefully felt wise. Protecting privacy felt necessary. Each choice made sense on its own. Together, they shifted the energy of the house. Where visibility had once been reassuring, it now felt demanding. Where openness had once brought connection, it now felt exposing. The mansion responded by doing what it always did. It preserved form. It maintained order. It kept memory intact. But memory without renewal becomes pressure. The rooms remembered how they were meant to be used. When they were not used that way, the difference became noticeable. The house did not judge. It simply contrasted past fullness with present restraint. This was the beginning of the cracks. Not breaks, not damage. Just hairline changes in behavior and atmosphere that slowly redefined what felt normal. The family continued to function. The house continued to stand. But the alignment that once felt effortless now required attention. And attention, once required, rarely returns to ease. As external pressure grew, internal distance followed. Disagreements did not arrive as arguments, but as postponements. Conversations ended earlier. Decisions took longer. What once felt shared began to fragment into parallel concerns that rarely met in the same room. The house magnified this shift. Its layout encouraged separation without requiring conflict. Bedrooms offered retreat. Formal rooms discouraged candor. Corridors allowed avoidance to feel polite. Family members learned how to pass one another without interruption. These patterns felt harmless. They even felt considerate, yet they created space for worry to settle. Emotional strain did not need to announce itself when architecture already provided places to hide it. Over time, habits formed around containment. Stress stayed unspoken. Disappointment became routine. Expectations remained high while tolerance narrowed. The mansion did not cause these changes. It facilitated them. It provided structure where confrontation might have forced clarity. Silence became a tool. Distance became a courtesy. Even care took on a careful tone. The house rewarded composure. It made vulnerability feel out of place. This was especially true during moments that once would have brought people together. Meals shortened. Gatherings thinned. Shared time shifted toward obligation rather than relief. The family continued to function outwardly, maintaining appearances that still felt credible to the city. Inside, the effort increased. Holding things together required intention. Small signs accumulated. A door closed more often than before. A light left off by choice. A room avoided because it carried too much memory. None of this appeared dramatic. It appeared reasonable. That was the danger. When stress presents itself as responsibility, it rarely gets questioned. The house held these changes without comment. It did not signal alarm. It preserved routine even as meaning drained from it. Over time, restraint replaced ease. Care became management. Togetherness became scheduling. The mansion still looked whole, but the feeling inside had shifted from abundance to maintenance. This was not collapse. It was compression. Pressure finding shape inside walls built to keep everything orderly. And once pressure takes shape, it tends to seek release. By the time the cracks were visible, they no longer felt new. They felt familiar. What changed was not behavior, but interpretation. Moments once dismissed as temporary began to read as patterns. Fatigue lingered longer. Decisions carried more weight. The house reflected this shift with quiet accuracy. Rooms that once invited gathering now suggested caution. Movement slowed. Voices lowered. Even footsteps sounded deliberate. The mansion did not resist these changes. It organized them. Its symmetry turned imbalance into routine. Its permanence reframed uncertainty as endurance. This made it harder to tell when stress crossed into harm. Responsibility and restraint looked the same from a distance. Inside, they felt heavier each week. Family members continued to perform competence. They fulfilled roles. They kept schedules. They avoided drama. The absence of overt conflict was taken as proof that things were under control. But control is not the same as health. The house maintained order so effectively that it masked erosion. Support systems weakened without spectacle. Help was delayed because nothing appeared urgent. The mansion held everyone upright while pressure accumulated below the surface. In this stage, the cracks stopped being about money or schedule or space. They became psychological. A sense that effort no longer produced relief. A feeling that rest did not restore. The house amplified this quietly. Its walls carried memory but not reassurance. Its size made solitude feel official. This was the danger of a well-built structure. It could sustain strain long enough to normalize it. By the time strain demanded attention, it felt embedded. The mansion still stood complete. The family still appeared functional. But the environment had shifted from supportive to demanding, from shelter to standard. The cracks had not broken anything yet. They had simply redefined the conditions of living inside the house. And once conditions change, outcomes tend to follow. The final descent did not begin with a single catastrophic moment. It began with convergence. Every unresolved strain moved closer at the same time. Financial pressure tightened. Emotional distance deepened. Fatigue stopped lifting between seasons. Inside Hunter Mansion, the house absorbed the weight quietly. Days felt heavier before they felt different. Mornings started later. Nights ended earlier. The structure that once organized life now framed exhaustion. Responsibilities overlapped without relief. Decisions carried consequences that could no longer be deferred. The family reached a point where holding everything together required more energy than anyone had left. This was not a dramatic collapse. It was a slow compression of options. Choices narrowed. Paths closed. The house reflected this with brutal neutrality. Rooms that once offered retreat now felt enclosing. Silence no longer restored. It pressed. The mansion did not escalate emotion. It clarified it. It made the imbalance unmistakable. The same walls that had supported success now amplified isolation. In this phase, help was difficult to request because nothing looked visibly broken. Appearances still held. The address still carried weight. The routine still functioned. But the cost of maintaining that appearance exceeded what the family could pay internally. Tension reached a point where endurance no longer signaled strength. It signaled depletion. The mansion continued to stand firm, its order intact, its presence unquestioned. But inside that order, something essential was failing. This was the moment when the trajectory became irreversible, not because of one act, but because the margin for recovery had disappeared. When pressure reaches that state, it does not need an explosion. It only needs one more day without relief. The decisive moment arrived without spectacle. No alarms, no witnesses, just a quiet sequence of actions that closed off alternatives. Inside Hunter Mansion, the day narrowed to a single corridor of time where choices stopped branching. The house held the moment the way it held everything else, precisely, impassively. Rooms remained unchanged as the meaning inside them shifted. What followed was not confusion, but finality. The act itself mattered less than its permanence. It turned pressure into outcome. It made the unspoken irreversible. When discovery came, it carried the shock of contrast rather than surprise. The mansion looked the same. Light fell where it always had. The structure did not signal that anything had ended. That was the cruelty of it. The space offered no warning and no relief. Afterward, the house absorbed the aftermath with the same discipline it had absorbed success. Doors closed, rooms were avoided, silence took on a new density. The location of the event became fixed in memory, not dramatic. Exact. A room at the end of a path that would never be neutral again. The family faced consequences without preparation. Grief moved unevenly through the house. Some spaces filled with presence, others emptied completely. The mansion made this visible. Its scale refused to let loss feel private. Every absence echoed. Every routine broke against the same walls that once enforced stability. In this phase, the house stopped organizing life and began preserving the moment of rupture. It held it intact. The structure remained functional. The meaning did not. This was the cost of permanence. The event did not damage the building. It changed the way the building was experienced. From that point forward, the mansion carried a fixed reference point. Everything before felt distant. Everything after had to pass through that room. After the moment passed, the house entered a different phase of existence. Nothing moved quickly anymore. Time thickened. Days stretched without direction. Inside Hunter Mansion, routine did not return. It fragmented. Certain rooms became unusable, not by rule, but by instinct. Paths through the house rerouted themselves. People learned where not to go. Grief did not unfold evenly. It pooled. It receded. It returned without warning. The mansion contained all of it without distinction. Its walls did not absorb pain. They preserved it. Memory attached itself to corners, door frames, and light patterns. Even ordinary actions acquired weight. Sitting felt intentional. Speaking felt disruptive. Silence became the default language. The house no longer offered structure. It demanded negotiation. Every day required choices that once had been automatic. The family adjusted slowly. Unsure which habits were safe to keep, stability did not reappear. It hardened into stillness. The mansion remained intact, its exterior unchanged, its presence authoritative. From the outside, nothing suggested rupture. Inside, meaning had collapsed. The space no longer supported living. It recorded it. The house became an archive rather than a refuge. This was the final transformation, not abandonment, not decay, preservation. The event did not end the story. It fixed it. From that point forward, the mansion carried a permanent imbalance between form and function. It stood complete while life inside it hesitated. And in that hesitation, the tragedy settled into place, not as a memory that fades, but as a condition that endures. After the tragedy, decisions arrived quickly, even as understanding lagged behind. Ownership shifted not because of vision, but necessity. The house was too large to remain suspended in grief. Inside Hunter Mansion, practical concerns replaced emotional ones. Maintenance schedules mattered more than memory. Security mattered more than silence. The family faced a question that had no gentle answer. Keep the house and live inside its weight, or release it and live with absence instead. What followed was not resolution, but transition. Rooms were emptied selectively. Objects moved before meaning caught up. The house resisted nothing. It accepted change the same way it had accepted loss, by staying intact. As the private era closed, a public future began to form. The mansion's identity loosened from the family and attached itself to the city. This shift was gradual but decisive. What had once been personal space became institutional space. The logic was simple. Preservation required use. Vacancy invited decay. To survive, the house needed people again, not family, visitors. The transformation did not erase the past. It reframed it. Grief became history. Silence became atmosphere. The house learned to host without belonging. This was the first afterlife, not abandonment, but recontextualization. The mansion remained standing, its architecture unchanged, its story no longer private. In becoming accessible, it became survivable. The building outlived the moment that nearly froze it. It entered a phase defined not by ownership, but by continuity. As the house transitioned into public use, its daily rhythm changed again. Movement returned, but it was different. Visitors arrived with curiosity rather than familiarity. Inside Hunter Mansion, footsteps followed guided paths, voices lowered by habit, not grief. The mansion learned a new language. Interpretation replaced memory. Rooms were no longer lived in, they were explained. What had once been private silence became curated quiet. Objects gained labels, spaces gained narratives. This did not restore what had been lost. It stabilized what remained. The building adapted because it had to. Public presence brought maintenance, funding, and oversight. These practical benefits kept the structure alive. At the same time, they introduced distance. The story of the house became shareable, repeatable, safer. Tragedy softened into context. Pain shifted into background. This was not erasure, it was management. The house could not carry raw experience forever. To endure, it had to translate it. As a museum, the mansion performed continuity. It held exhibitions. It welcomed attention. It accepted being seen. In doing so, it diluted the intensity that once defined it. The rooms filled again, but not with family, with viewers. Their presence was temporary by design. They left at closing time. The house remained. This arrangement protected the structure from both neglect and intimacy. It ensured survival at the cost of belonging. Over time, the mansion became known more for what it displayed than what it had endured. Art replaced absence as the focal point. Beauty overlaid memory. This was not betrayal, it was strategy. The building chose longevity over truthfulness of feeling. In its public life, the house became balanced again. Function matched form. Stability returned, but in a different register. The mansion was no longer a home. It was an institution. Institutions are designed to outlive individuals. In this role, the house succeeded. It carried history forward without requiring anyone to live inside it. In its final afterlife, the house learned how to be remembered without being inhabited. Time moved forward while the building stayed fixed, offering continuity without intimacy. Inside Hunter Mansion, the past no longer dictated daily decisions. It informed them. The mansion became a reference point rather than a burden. Staff arrived and left on schedules. Visitors passed through with purpose. The house absorbed these cycles easily. It had been built to endure repetition. What changed was the relationship between space and consequence. Actions no longer altered the future of the house. They passed through it. This reduced risk. It also reduced meaning. The building was safe from collapse because no one depended on it emotionally. In this state, the mansion achieved stability of a different kind. It no longer had to respond to grief or ambition. It only had to remain standing. Stories were preserved at a distance. Tragedy was acknowledged but contained. The house could now hold memory without being shaped by it. This was the quiet success of institutional life. Survival without exposure, longevity without vulnerability. The mansion's presence became reassuring to the city. It represented continuity in a landscape that had changed around it. New buildings rose, old industries faded. The house remained legible, familiar, calm. In doing so, it fulfilled a role its original builders could not have predicted. It outlived not just people, but the conditions that created them. This was not redemption, it was resolution. The building found a way to exist that did not require sacrifice. Its afterlife proved the central truth of its story. Dinh thự sống lâu hơn con người. When people leave, walls remain. And when walls remain long enough, they stop asking who suffered inside them. They simply stand, offering continuity to anyone willing to accept it. Today, if you walk up the drive toward Hunter Mansion, nothing warns you to slow down. The facade still reads as confidence. Columns rise evenly. Stone holds its color. The house presents itself the way it always has, composed and complete. You step through the entrance and follow a path shaped by intention rather than memory. Rooms open in sequence. Light falls predictably. The air feels controlled. Somewhere along the way, you realize how easy it is to move forward without asking what stayed behind. The mansion does not interrupt you. It never has. It allows passage. It allows observation. It allows distance. At the end of a corridor, there are rooms that look no different from the others. No markers. No signs. Just space that once held a moment the building never forgot. The floors are clean. The walls are intact. What changed is invisible unless you know where to stand and how long to pause. This is how the house survives. By letting time pass through it while it stays still, the tragedy that shaped its interior life is no longer loud. It has been absorbed into routine. Visitors come and go. Stories are told carefully. Meaning is framed. Nothing here demands that you feel what happened. The mansion has learned restraint, and restraint is what allows it to remain open, admired, and useful. But if you slow down, if you stop performing the role of visitor, the balance shifts. You notice how the space resists comfort, how scale creates distance, how beauty can feel impersonal when it has outlived its purpose. This house was built as a declaration. It became a container. It ended as a witness, not to excess or success, but to the quiet cost of sustaining both. The walls still stand because they were built to. The people did not endure in the same way. That is the difference architecture never explains. It only demonstrates. The question this mansion leaves behind is not about wealth or tragedy alone. It is about intention. When we build to prove that we have arrived, what do we leave ourselves room to feel? And when the proof outlives the people who needed it, what remains is not an answer, but a structure that keeps asking,